Let me ask you first about the results in New York City. Bill de Blasio easily winning his term as mayor of New York, but more significantly, the first time that New York has elected a Democratic mayor since 1989.
Yeah, I mean, people forget that sometimes because New York is such a Democratic city. But we forget with Mike Bloomberg and Rudy Giuliani that it has been so long. I mean, David Dinkins was the last. But de Blasio, I got to tell you something. Beyond the issues, in many ways, this was a campaign that was won on commercials that put his family out there as a mosaic of New York City. It was a biracial, if you will, family that just connected on so many levels, and he was the right candidate at the right time, post-Mike Bloomberg, and a lot of New Yorkers were tired of Bloomberg, wanted to move on from Giuliani, and this was a dramatic shift, big time to the left, and it's going to be interesting for a lot of New Yorkers. They have not had a mayor like this in a very long time.
We were talking about the New York City mayor earlier tonight on C-SPAN Radio's Washington Today, and the fact that he spent about $100 million to win a third term, and yet this election tonight, Bill de Blasio, some view as a rebuke of his last 4 years as mayor. Yeah,
I mean, his candidate was Joe Lhota, and Giuliani's candidate was Joe Lhota, and they were tied to Joe Lhota, and that was the biggest problem for Joe Lhota, is being tied to Bloomberg and Giuliani. And in many ways, it's so interesting. A mayor can be very popular for 2 terms. It is that third term that becomes virtually impossible for even the most effective and popular mayor to stay connected to voters. It's just, I think there's fatigue. They're done with you. And that's why 2 terms isn't just constitutionally the way it usually works, but politically and practically, Steve, that's about your time. You should be, that the warranty's done after that.
Steve Adubato, stay with us for just a moment. I want James Hohmann to respond to that comment.
Well, I definitely think that what we're seeing in New York City is a rebuke of Mike Bloomberg, and that was really the story of the Democratic primary, where Christine Quinn, who was the leader of the city council, key player in allowing Bloomberg to be able to seek the third term, just got decimated over that. A lot of frustration among Democratic rank and file about Bloomberg, sort of fatigue with him, and a desire to turn the page. And we'll see. De Blasio is going to pursue a pretty ambitious agenda that could cause some backlash. He is not necessarily popular among business leaders and some of the Wall Street community, with whom Bloomberg had such a good relationship.
Steve Adubato, we're looking at the scene not far from where you're at in Asbury Park, New Jersey. Is this day one of the Chris Christie 2016 presidential campaign?
I don't think the governor could even wait until the morning, tomorrow morning. This is the campaign for the presidency. When Chris Christie goes around this country and tells folks and reminds folks that he got half of the Hispanic vote, that he held his own in urban areas, that he ended his campaign in Union City, New Jersey. What does that mean to folks listening on C-SPAN across the country? Union City is about as Democratic as you get. The last stop that Chris Christie made in this campaign was in Union City with a Democratic mayor. That's where he was. That mayor was one of over 50 Democratic high-level elected officials who endorsed him. That's where he ended his campaign. That's how he wins in a state with over 700,000 more Democrats than Republicans. What other Republican across this country is going to be able to say something like that in a presidential campaign, particularly when people are so sick and tired of the gridlock in Washington? Christie's going to say, look, Barack Obama didn't even come to New Jersey to campaign against me. I have a relationship with the White House. We get things done here. And Barbara Buono couldn't get Barack Obama to come here. I mean, from a governmental and from a practical political point of view, he seems to be pressing all the right buttons.
But was it a mistake for the Democrats not to do more, at least to try to puncture some of the holes in the Chris Christie balloon?
You see, in many ways, that would seem to make sense. But if you're a Democrat and you're a legislative candidate, all 120 seats, every seat in the state Senate, all 40, all 80 seats in the state assembly were up. If you're there, you have a choice to make. If I'm in a swing district, a tough district, I can go either way. Do I go after Chris Christie, or do I look at the polls in my district and see that he's up 60 to 40% against my candidate, the Democratic candidate. What did they do? Those Democratic incumbent legislators, Steve, started putting TV spots and put mailers out saying, we work well with Chris Christie because we believe in bipartisan government and cooperation, unlike in Washington. So what they did was they actually helped Chris Christie by putting out those spots and hurt Barbara Buono. They were trying to save their own hides.
Steve Adubato, we're looking at the scene at Asbury Park, New Jersey. For those not quite so familiar with this part of the state, what exit is it off of, but more importantly, the significance of this venue tonight for the Christie campaign?
Asbury Park is exit 105 off the Garden State Parkway. It is the home of Bruce Springsteen. Greetings from Asbury Park was Bruce Springsteen's one of his first albums. The connection between Bruce Springsteen and Chris Christie is legendary for those of us who live in the Garden State and know the governor. What I mean by that is, well before Chris Christie became U.S. Attorney in New Jersey and then ran for governor, he was out of college. When he went to Delaware, he was an unabashed fan of Springsteen, has gone to over 130 Springsteen concerts, knows every song, sings them loud. He has a terrible voice. And even though his politics are diametrically opposed to Springsteen, in connection with Sandy, they came together, hugged, became friends, never thought that would happen. And that's the connection to Asbury Park. It is hardcore Jersey.
Go back to Steve Adubato. I know you're focusing primarily on New York and New Jersey, but as you look at the results from Virginia, what are you thinking?
Well, I'm thinking that, put it this way, for Hillary and Bill Clinton, if Terry McAuliffe loses that race, I mean, what an embarrassment. I mean, they put it all on the line there. And you think about these races. I mean, Tip O'Neill obviously, famously said that all politics is local, but go the other way. You think in Virginia and New Jersey, the implications nationally, Chris Christie winning this race big, the national implications. If McAuliffe loses, or how close it is, and with Cuccinelli running this race, if it doesn't look good for the Clintons, that means that's an issue on some level for Hillary Clinton because they put it on the line for their guy. I mean, people sometimes outside the Beltway forget how close the Clintons are to Terry McAuliffe. He's their guy. You could not be closer to them than they are. And so in some ways, it's a little awkward and embarrassing. He was supposed to have a more comfortable lead than this.
88% of the results coming in from the Commonwealth of Virginia. Again, Ken Cuccinelli is ahead, but only slightly. We're keeping an eye on Fairfax, Loudoun, Prince William County. Right now, Steve Adubato, you're familiar with Fairfax County, showing a substantial lead for Terry McAuliffe. A little bit closer, although he still has a lead in Prince William County, which is just south of Fairfax County, and in the vote-rich area of Loudoun County.
Yeah, again, it's so interesting when you look at these numbers. It's always a question of not what's in, but what's not in. And my understanding, even though I'm a Jersey guy from the New York area, my understanding is that those are way more Democratic areas than the numbers that have been counted already. And they better be for Terry McAuliffe, because if not, and Ken Cuccinelli wins this race with, as I understand, another candidate, a libertarian candidate, who's actually picked up a few significant votes. I don't know what percentage there is, Steve, but it's not one or two. It's more than that.
Robert Sarvis has 127,000 votes. Right now, he has about 7% of the vote in Virginia.
That is huge, because those votes clearly, when you think about it, you would say a very high percentage, it's fair to say, safe to say, Steve, that a very high percentage of those votes would have gone to the Republican candidate, Cuccinelli. So I'm thinking McAuliffe better win. He absolutely better win for the Democrats and for the Clintons.
So let's walk through the possibility, strong possibility, of Chris Christie running for president. What's going to happen in the next year? How does he roll out a potential bid? And what kind of challenges is he going to face within the Republican Party?
Well, one of the first ones is a very practical and very interesting issue that no one talks about, and that is, how does a sitting governor in a state that's very hard to govern, because the 1947 Constitution in New Jersey calls for the governor to be so incredibly powerful. This is not Texas. No disrespect to Texas and Governor, President Bush, who ran, as governor from Texas, or Rick Perry. It's not Texas, meaning the governor has incredible responsibilities, and not just in a crisis. And so my point is, not only do we need a sitting governor who's actively engaged, but there is a Securities and Exchange Commission rule, a law, that says a sitting governor in a state like New Jersey that has pension funds invested, right, cannot raise money from Wall Street for political campaigns. What does that mean? There's going to be a very practical and very real issue for a governor like Chris Christie to ask this question. Do I resign as governor if I choose to run for president? I believe he will. And if you do that, does Lieutenant Governor Kim Guadagno, who a recent poll showed that 60% plus of the people don't know who she is, do you do that? That's tricky. And if he doesn't do that, how do you forego all that money from Wall Street? Can you run for president in this country and not raise any money in Wall Street? Or do you say, I'm not going to raise it myself and let one of the super PACs do it and skirt the law and the rule? Those are very practical, real issues that no one really talks about. Do I think Christie right now is the favorite? Yes, I do. Do I think those are real, not so sexy issues that you have to deal with that are practical? Yeah, and God forbid there's a hurricane, a storm, and a crisis. How does Chris Christie run for president and be governor during that? Real challenging times.
We're watching the scene inside the Asbury Park Convention Center as the crowd cheering with the confirmation that Chris Christie has won with about 60% of the vote compared to right now 39% for Barbara Bono, the Democratic candidate. Who's advising Chris Christie? Who are some of the key people in his inner circle?
The number one advisor is a guy by the name of Bill Palatucci, who is on the National Republican Committee. Palatucci is an attorney practicing at a firm by the name of Gibbons firm here in New Jersey. Bill Palatucci has been with Chris Christie from day one. He was his close friend. They served in a law practice together early on in their careers. And Palatucci has been with him when Chris Christie was elected to the Morris County Freeholder Board many, many years ago and lost his re-election campaign, Steve. And he's been with him through thick and thin. And Palatucci has great national Republican contacts. He ran the Bush campaign here in New Jersey. He's a great fundraiser. There's a guy by the name of Mike Duhame. Mike Duhame is a very smart political strategist, very closely tied to Rudy Giuliani, ran Giuliani's campaign, presidential campaign, which did not go very well, but Duhame, smart, strategic guy, knows the media operation. A woman by the name of Maria Camella, smart media communications person as well. Again, a lot of these folks are Rudy Giuliani folks, and they're very moderate, not hardcore, right-leaning Tea Party folks at all. None of those folks are part of the Christie operation. Very moderate, practical, good fundraising Republicans.
A lot of attention on the new book out today by Mark Halpert and John Heilman, Double Down. A couple of points that came up in the vetting process, some red flags for the Romney campaign, and also some of the jokes that Mitt Romney made about Chris Christie's weight. Your thoughts on those points?
You know, first of all, for those who don't know, around the country, Chris Christie had a procedure done a while back to limit the amount of food that he could take in. He has lost, it looks like to me, and I've known the governor for over a decade, it looks like about 50 pounds. He does not talk about his exact weight. He does not talk about how much weight he has lost. He says publicly, quote, I'm about half the way there. I think he's mostly done it for his family, but clearly has a connection to running for president. And that is what I think he's planning on doing, is running for president about 100 pounds less than what he was, say, during Hurricane Sandy. And I think that's practical and real. And the stuff about what was said by, Romney, I don't know what he said and didn't say, but Romney said publicly over the weekend on Meet the Press that he's a big supporter of Christie's. I think it's embarrassing, those things to be said, but I think also you're trying to move books, and a lot of insiders say a lot of things, and who knows what's real and what's not.
Steve Adubato, who's joining us live. He is a political analyst for WNET, and we check in with him quite often during the campaign process. And my guess is if Chris Christie does, in fact, run for president, we'll have you on many times more in the days and weeks ahead. Thanks very much for being with us.
Always a pleasure, Steve. Have a great night.